All right, well, let's get started. I know people will join us along the way, which is usually what happens. I'm Michael Wexler. I'm the Associate Director here at the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and Society. And I want to welcome you to our March for Bringing, which is a Yiddish word that means to come together or to gather. And we have some very special guests with us today for our gathering. I had to edit their bios quite a bit because they're so long and extensive. And Rivkah Slonim and Elaine Leeder with us today. Our title for today is Radical Chasidism, a dialogue about restorative justice. So that should be pretty interesting, to say the least. Elaine, raise your hand real quick so we know who you are. You can see her name on the screen. Elaine Leeder, as I say, I'm giving the short version of the bios. Elaine Schneerson Leeder is Professor Emerita of Sociology and the Dean Emerita of the School of Social Sciences at Sonoma State University. She has an MSW from Yeshiva University, an MPH from University of California at Berkeley, a PhD from Cornell University, and has published 6 books, including My Life with Lifers, documenting her work at San Quentin State Prison. Her awards include a National Endowment of the Humanities Fellowship, visiting scholar status at the United States Holocaust Museum, and a Real Hero in Education Award from the American Red Cross for her work in prisons in California and New York. That's hard to follow up on that, but Rivkah does. Rivkah Slonim. Rivkah, raise your hand, even though we can see your name. There's Rivkah. Rivkah Slonim is the Associate Director at the Rohr Chabad Center for Jewish Student Life at Binghamton University, which she co-founded with her husband, Rabbi Aaron Slonim, in 1985. A self-described Hasidic feminist, Slonim is an internationally known lecturer and activist. She is the editor of Total Immersion, a mikveh anthology, and Bread and Fire, Jewish Women Find God in the Everyday, as well as the author of Holy Intimacy, The Heart and Soul of Jewish Marriage. Slonim serves on the editorial board of the Rohr Jewish Learning Institute, on the executive board of, is it Tamim?
Tamim.
Yes, Tamim, and is a senior lecturer at Based on Women International. So without further ado, I will let our speakers, I'm looking forward to this personally quite a bit. I'll let our speakers speak.
Well, thanks so much. And by the way, thanks. I noticed a lot of my family and friends are on that list who showed up today. So I'm really grateful. And I have to say that doing this is really quite unusual. Rivkah and I are a strange shidduch, as we have said before. I am truly a secular Jew, or at least was until the last couple of years. And as a result of Michael introducing me to Menachem, who with the IJSS, I was matched with Rivkah, and we have become Schwesters, Yiddish Schwesters. And I'm touched to be able to work with her. So I want to introduce Rivkah, who will say a few words, and then we'll begin.
Thanks, Elaine. Yes, we both swiped right, and here we is. Elaine, let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, your current passion, your late career. Give us some background history on this concept called restorative justice, and tell us how you got started.
Okay, well, it started in the 1990s. I happened to be teaching at Ithaca College, and a group of high school kids came up for the summer, and they wanted we had to take them on tours. So one of them wanted to go to a prison, so I took him to Elmira Correctional Facility. And in a very serendipitous moment, beshert perhaps, I asked the warden if they had any education, and they said, well, we have GED. And I said, would you like college? And he said, well, of course. And so I went up to the university, asked the chief academic officer if I could go down and teach for free. Would they give him credit, the guys in prison? And he said, sure. So that was the 90s, and I taught at Elmira for about 4 or 5 years. That program, in fact, has been revitalized and still going on. And then I came to California, and to be honest with you, I missed prisons terribly, having taken a job as a dean. And so I went to work at San Quentin, running, teaching again, sociology, which is my field. And then the guys invited me to run a group with them, which I did for a number of years, but I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to understand, my father was a Holocaust refugee. I wanted to understand the nature of evil. Why is it that people do horrible things to each other? So I got into restorative justice, and restorative justice is really the sense that you bring together both the person who was harmed and the person who did the harm in an equal safe space where they communicate and they talk about the event that took place. So on that note, that's kind of an introduction, but Rivkah, I'd like you to say what it is that you do and how it is that we came together as well.
First, let me just say, Elaine, it's a shame that kid you were giving a tour to didn't ask you to bring the Messiah. I mean, all he did was say he wanted to see a prison, and look what you did.
Thank you.
I hope you can work on that project next.
I promise.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm bolstered. Well, very much like you, I've been working in the university space for many years, for about 40 years now, but not in the academic side of things, but rather I would say in the human side of things, giving kids all the support they need, and I hope giving them a lot of lessons, because I think the most important lessons are actually gleaned in between the classes they attend. So running the Chabad Center has meant giving them community, family, friendship, support through difficult times, and all kinds of stuff they go through. We don't need to belabor that point. We know that. And in the last few years, I got lucky enough to be involved with the Institute, and through that to meet you, my new wonderful friend.
Good, thank you. So, when we started to talk about doing this, I said we should have it be the radical and the Chasid. And you said, no, it should be radical Chasidism. So I didn't get it. What could be radical about Chasidism?
Well, especially when you're talking about the Rebbe's teachings, Rabbi Menachem M. Schneerson, the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, I think the only word that applies is radical. He was radical in any number of ways, but relevant to our discussion today, I would say that in an age and in an era where most Jewish leaders, let alone Hasidic leaders, were looking to build up their quote unquote communities. Look, it was just in the shadow of the Holocaust. And yet the Rebbe was worrying about all people, Jew and Gentile alike, in all stages and in all circumstances. And as early as in the 70s, while addressing an audience, and I think about this, who was he talking to? He was talking to mostly refugees themselves or their children, still very much living with the mindset and in the shadow of imprisonment in the Gulag, in the Soviet Union, in Siberia, survivors of Hitler's camps, people who had good reason to be afraid of anything and everything that wasn't part of their close circle of like-minded friends and family. And the Rebbe kind of urged them to open their minds and to think outside of that echo chamber, you could say, and of all things, consider the needs of people in prison. To think about the spark of divinity, regardless of what it was that landed that person in prison, and to find ways to address the ills of the American prison system, which the Rebbe felt was focusing on the punitive rather than on the true reason for imprisonment, which should be rehabilitation, giving prisoners the ability to find and then nourish and nurture their divine spark and to live in the divine image. And I could only imagine what was going through the minds of those people. They were like, what's he talking about? Obviously, out of respect, they were listening, but did they really understand what the Rebbe was calling them to do?
Interesting.
So it's kind of radical. And this kind of radicalism is the hallmark of the Rebbe's teachings and work. You know, he presents these very progressive ideas to people who, I don't know, even if today, many of them would understand the term progressive, but he does so using the most traditionally anchored teachings. And this seamless like melding or blending of the novel, the new, the progressive, and the age-old traditional, that was his part of his genius for sure. But you tell me, as a practitioner, and there are not many of you, I understand, what do you find radical about restorative justice?
Well, like what you're talking about, those of us who work in the field of restorative justice, well, let me say it began in Native American talking circles. So there was really a sense of egalitarianism and equality, that those who had done any harm within the community would be brought in and have a dialogue with the community and the person to whom they had hurt. And then the community would come up with solutions that were accessible and acceptable to all members. So it was talking circles until you figured it out. And now it's been brought into all over the world in many, many different kind of venues. Mine is kind of a specialty within a specialty. And what is unusual about it is that it's not punitive, much like what the Rebbe was saying. Those of us who work in this field really do believe in the prison areas in abolitionism, that prisons are not rehabilitative and that people do not, or if they do get better, it's in spite of the system, not because of it. And so you can find restorative justice in many unlikely places. It's done in district attorney's offices in order to keep things out of court. It's done in schools to keep kids who would maybe cause trouble back together with the people that they hurt to communicate with each other and find mutual solutions. It's used recently. I've come in contact with some Jewish women who are working with rabbinic organizations around sexual harm, and rabbis who might have done sexual harm, and then their organizations being held accountable, not just the individuals, but the entire organizations. And so what it really is, I read this wonderful book recently called Repentance and Repair by Danya Rutenberg, and it takes the teachings, Jewish teachings, and applies it to that which we do in this field. The thing about restorative justice is that the setting is very voluntary. You have to agree to do this kind of work. And so already you're setting up a different dynamic. The other thing about it is that it's truthful speaking, straight from the heart, no frills and no cover-up, really talking deeply and honestly. It also sets up a very safe and respectful environment for each other. That too has to be prepared and done ahead of time. And there really is a commitment on all sides to repenting, repairing, and maybe forgiving for some of the most egregious crimes that I work with that I'll tell you about later in our discussion. So it's unique in that it's rehabilitative and spiritually transformative in a way that prisons and the other kinds of things are adversarial.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable. And before I ask you to tell us more, to break it down for us, just want to share a few reflections. One is, you know, the term restorative, which is really another word for to return. And that's what the Hebrew word teshuvah means. You know, it's always defined as to repent, but the Hebrew word teshuvah actually means to return to the core of your goodness. And I just find the whole idea of restorative justice so moving. I also feel like you're saying that you work with what other people would call outliers. But having been fortunate enough to be schooled in the Rebbe's teachings, I know that for him, there were no outliers. And this is what he hoped to teach everyone, to see the spark of goodness, to see the spark of the divine in anyone, wherever they might find themselves, to make them understand that they weren't bad people who had done bad things. They were good people who had made mistakes. And thinking about you going in to meet these people and speaking with them and their families and bringing them together and allowing them to have their dignity and their goodness restored is just deeply, deeply moving. The other thing I wanted to just reflect on is you talked about how this is, of course, voluntary. So much about the prison system is compulsory. They strip away your humanity, your dignity, your personhood. You become a number and they make you do this and this at this particular time, at that particular time. And it reminds me of a wonderful story of the late author Herman Wouk, who once was in a conversation with the Rebbe, and perhaps he thought he would curry favor with this, parochial Hasidic figure. And he said, the American Jews, what's going to be with them? And the Rebbe looked at him and he said, the American Jews, the most wonderful Jews. You can't force them to do anything, but you can teach them to do anything. And, I love how you're describing the voluntary nature. So tell us more about how it actually works. Break it down for us. What does the process look like?
And let me say, it takes a lot of time to get people ready for this sort of process. You don't just say, hey, let's go to the prison tomorrow and meet the person who killed your daughter. Often what happens for the person in prison, and I only work with people in prison, you could do it elsewhere, but I choose to go into the belly of the beast. And
of course.
As I said, my father was a Holocaust refugee. I feel drawn to darkness. And I'm comfortable in the dark places. It's home.
You're being drawn to the sparks of light in the dark places.
I agree with you completely because I see it. And what you have described is a remarkable process. When I go in, most of the people that I work with have been in there anywhere from 10 to 40 years. I'm working with a guy at Pelican Bay right now, 38 years he's been in prison for a crime he did not commit. We're trying to get him out. And what happens is a process that takes place, sometimes more often in spite of the system, but where they develop a sense of awareness that they have done something that has hurt other people. And you can tell if somebody's got the awareness because if they use a term like, I caught a crime, I caught a case, means they caught a cold. They didn't do anything. It came to them rather than them doing it. But if they start to say, on such and such a date, I killed so-and-so, and I honor his being for the rest of his life, and I atone for what I've done, or any number of ways of speaking about their awareness. After that, then comes the next stage of programming, which is when they find something. Often it's religion. I mean, I went into a prison 2 weeks ago in Tucson, Arizona, and met 2 Jews who were doing their teshuvah inside for the crimes they have committed. So they program, and it can be religious. It can be training dogs. It could be becoming a gardener. It could be self-help groups. Often there are groups, rehabilitative and restorative justice groups, where the men confront each other with the reality of what they've done. And they talk about their own victimization. Every person I have ever worked with, and I've worked with hundreds now, have early childhood trauma. Something happened in their early lives to turn them into these rageful beings. And so we help them see that. We also help them see that they are more than the worst thing that they have ever done. Brian Stevenson's phrase, do you want to be known for the worst thing you've ever done? I sure don't. So we begin to help them see the spark of divinity, if you will, in them. And there's tears, and there's pain, and there's brotherhood. that develops because they're sharing these deep feelings within. Then there's atonement, which is beginning to work with other people and really helping others take full responsibility for what they themselves have done too. They really begin to make their changes, and that can be in prison, often in prison. Maybe they mentor young gangbangers. Maybe they stop using drugs. Maybe they start writing. I mean, there are wonderful prison memoirs of people inside coming to themselves. And the final stage, and this is where I feel the most privileged, there's a redemptive stage, and that's the crescendo of the atonement process. It usually concludes with meeting the family or the victim of their crimes. So they do some redemptive work, and if they can't meet the actual families, what they can do is perhaps write an apology letter that can be in their file, or they can work with others to help them to grow. So it really is a process that evolves over time. It's not instantaneous. So that's the process I know. Rivkah, I think you can relate this to Jewish thought, right?
Well, there are so many things coming to mind. One of those is what Maimonides delineates in his code about repentance. And he talks about a four-pronged process of leaving the sin, of expressing regret, of confessing before God, actually articulating what it is you did so that you can own it, and then resolving never to engage in said sin in the future. So there's a process, like you're saying, an unfurling, an awareness, and certainly a resolve to do better. And that's why it's so important for prisoners to be given the opportunity to prepare themselves for living the good life after they leave prison. And if that doesn't happen, if they don't have the proper resources to do that, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. It's a tragedy upon a tragedy. And that's why I'm so enamored of what you do. Tell us a few stories, Elaine. Tell us, give us a little bit of, insight, of course, without using names.
Oh no, I'll never use names. But these are the stories that touch my heart. The very first case that I worked on, and this, I'd been through a training, and then the next week, here I was. You get a call from the Department of Corrections that a woman wants to meet the man who killed her mother and sister. And the man is about to get out, and they're going to be in the same town because they went to high school together, and it was a drunk driving accident. So I prepped the woman for a couple of days, actually. I prepped the guy for a couple of days. You usually try to do 3 months, 6 months, even a year of prep, but we couldn't. So we went in, and the first thing was they hugged each other. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is pretty weird. And then we sat down, and the young man, who is now in his probably early 40s, he did this in his 20s, said, I never knew your mother and your sister. I think of them every day. Please tell me about them. And they spent an hour describing mother, sister. He wept. I wept. I mean, it was very touching. And then he said something I'm going to be out in a week, and I would really like to go to their graves and bring flowers. Will you come with me? And she said, yes. And so that was planned. And then he said, there's nothing I can ever do to make up for what I have done to you. She said, oh, yes, there is. What you can do is you can come with me on the lecture circuit when you get out, and we will talk about drunk driving and the consequences to everyone's lives. And they are now on the lecture circuit speaking about it. So that was my first case. So I knew I was hooked. Right? When that kind of thing happens, how often do you get to sit in a truly spiritual I, thou, Martin Buber moment, right? Where each is treating each other respectfully and with deep humane kindness. One that I really still think about a great deal is a woman who had been kidnapped at gunpoint by 3 men. Her daughter was held at gunpoint as well. And the daughter was around 9 at the time and allegedly had dynamite put on her back. And she was put in a closet. Both of them were put in a closet overnight. And then the mother was taken to the bank where she was the manager, forced at gunpoint to rob the bank, and then let go. And she ran home and let her kid out of the closet. Turns out it was not dynamite, but it was scary enough. And they were completely traumatized. For years, they were traumatized. But then there was something in her. The people who seek this, the ones who are the victims of the harm, the people who are harmed, have some remarkable something within them. This woman said, and this I've heard this often, I can't hate these people because it would be like me drinking poison and hoping that they would die. I can't hate, so I want to meet them. So it was during COVID. So I was sitting at this very same computer. One of these young men had written a letter that I had in my car. So I said, and I was on a Zoom to the prison with him, prepping him for the get together. So I said, why don't I read it to her? So I got her on the phone. I got him on the computer. I'm holding the phone to the computer. I mean, it was quite an orchestrated scene. And I read the letter, and it was this deepest, most humble apology. The daughter was on the phone as well, and he read the letter to her and another letter. And then he said, I'm sorry I ruined your childhood. And she said, oh, you didn't ruin my childhood. You were merely a speed bump. Later, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I was prepared because I'd had an earlier trauma and I was ready for it. 2 weeks later was his first parole hearing on Zoom. They waited for 2 hours in the waiting room of the parole board hearing, spoke on his behalf, and he was let out a few months later. Then we went to Southern California and all of us got together. The mother, the daughter, her brother, who was a support person, the parole officer, myself, my co-facilitator, the young man who had held her captive, his mother and his sister, 9 of us. And everyone was weeping and hugging and apologizing. And the mother of the person who did the harm said, I didn't raise my child to do these sorts of things. Please forgive me. The woman who had been held kidnapped brought plants and flowers for the family. We shared a meal, and now they're all in communication with each other. It doesn't get any better than that. Talk about teshuvah and transformation. And I could go on. I mean, I have so many more cases. We could spend hours talking about them, but I feel—
It doesn't, yeah, thank you for that, for letting us, opening up a little window, an aperture for us to see into what you've been doing. You're right, it doesn't get better, and it's never been more important than it is today for us to remember that at the core, each person has that goodness and that holy spark, and your work of extracting that, of extricating these people from that darkness is just, it's holy work. It's holy work.
I want to add, before you go on, it's not just me. There are thousands of us doing this. I'm just representing it because IJSS wants me to have this and Jewish spirituality together. It's never
how many people would you say are involved in this? Just a ballpark.
Oh, in the country, probably several thousand. In the world, probably that as well. I mean, we're taking it on the road. We're trying to let people know about it.
It is so bolstering. It is so wonderful to hear this. Thank you. In 1975, the Rebbe said the following. This is just a short extraction from a much longer talk. He said, when a person is in prison, they are denied the ability to do anything. placing a living person in a prison and denying them the ability to fulfill their mission and purpose of a man was born to toil, and those are words from King Solomon, is contrary to the Torah of kindness. This is cruel and does not benefit anyone. And when I listen to you describing that, I think about the ripple effects. It's not just that person or that family. Really, it's all of society that gets to benefit and be enriched by what's happening. And it reminds me, and I've been thinking about this a lot, it reminds me of the whole idea of the biblical cities of refuge, where if a person killed somebody inadvertently, they could run to these cities of refuge where the family members or friends could not exact retribution and kill them in revenge. Now, the thing about the cities were that they were populated by Levites. They had to be cities with a healthy economy, so there was plenty of opportunity for the people who ran there to not just find a place of refuge, but to actually have meaningful work. Fascinatingly, the person's teacher had to get up from wherever they lived, up and follow this person and move with them. So they have their teacher, they have to be gainfully employed. They're surrounded by Levites, people who are steeped in Torah, in traditional teachings, in goodness. And in fact, the law says that if the percentage of killers, as it were, became too high, the city could no longer act as a city of refuge. So they had to be surrounded with positive influences. And I think of restorative justice as a kind of city of refuge. And I just love the details surrounding the signs. So there had to be signs posted at every junction, at every crossroad in the biblical country of Israel, pointing to the closest cities of refuge. So when somebody was running, it should be very clear as to where was the closest city of refuge. And I think of people like yourself, Elaine, as those signs pointing to what can be redeemed, what can be better, a brighter, more beautiful tomorrow. You're a walking, talking, beautiful signpost. And it's inspiring to know that this work is being done.
I appreciate hearing.
Yeah.
I
No,
also want to say it's not just me.
I thank you.
Right. And I think there was something that you were going to say about the Rebbe's letter.
There is, yes, a letter he penned. Again, this is an extraction. And this was a theme he sounded over and over and over again. He said the purpose of prison isn't to punish for the sake of punishment. While prisoners are still in jail, they should free themselves from the character traits and causes that got them into the situation. That will enable them to follow the proper path when they are released and live a life of true freedom, freedom of the soul. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that idea of freedom. But before that, I wanted to also include that over and over, the Rebbe was intent on not just giving prisoners teachings and opportunities to study, to pray, to learn, but he was intent on providing them with practical good deeds that they could do. And I find that so important, tethering that process to practical deeds that you do, either on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or in honor of certain holidays and so on and so forth. So Aleph Institute that's began in the 80s has really trailblazed an enormous movement where prisoners can get matzah for Passover, can get goodies before Purim, can hear the Megillah read, and so on and so forth. And again, it's all about restoring that dignity. But talking about soul freedom, Rebbe talks about freedom of the soul. And in a separate letter from the Rebbe, not connected with prisoners per se, he explains this concept of freedom. And he does so by walking us through different aspects of creation. So what does the inanimate need to be free? What does a stone need to be free? Simply to be left alone. What does vegetation need to be free? Well, vegetation needs water and nutrients. Well, most do, and many need the sun, and they need to be rooted in earth so that they can grow. But when you look at the animal kingdom, if you tether the animal to one space, if you root them, you're taking away their freedom. They need the freedom to roam, to find food, nutrition, to be able to repopulate the species, to take care of their young, and so on and so forth. And when you get to the human strata, of course, there are all the metabolic needs that animals have. But then there's the specifically human need. And that is to find one's purpose and to live out one's purpose and to be able to contribute in a real way to making this world the divine abode it's supposed to be. And that's soul freedom, being able to contribute in a positive way to this job we are all ideally engaged in, which is transforming this world and finding the beauty in this beautiful garden, as it were. It's so easy to see the world as a jungle, but the Rebbe kept reminding us, no, it's actually a beautiful garden. And we have the privilege, the opportunity, and the responsibility to tend to that garden, irrespective of life circumstances.
I love the way you say that, because I believe that that's in fact what is going on behind the prison walls as well. That people are trying to tend their own gardens so that they can become better human beings. I often say that some of my best friends are murderers, rapists, and kidnappers because they have done that soul work. They've looked deep inside of themselves and they've tried to find a way to become a better person. A couple of weeks ago, as I said, I was in Arizona and I met a man who was converting to Judaism. His name was a very Christian name. And I said, what's it like to be in prison? And he said, you know, it could be awful, but I'm studying to convert. So it's like being in yeshiva. And I can study the Torah and I can learn how to become a good Jew. And I thought, that's a remarkable moment. And also watching people inside work with each other for that soul freedom, to help each other heal and to see deeper into themselves and understand how they got there and what they can do to redeem themselves. And when they're at that moment, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where some men were presenting. All of them were murderers. And they'd recently gotten out. And to a person, they wept as they told their stories because they had done the teshuvah and they knew what they'd done. And they were spending the rest of their lives dedicated to the people who they harmed and trying to do the work by reaching out to others. It's like, you know, lighting a match to another and give the match to another. So, you know, the Rebbe was onto something, and I wish more and more people could hear about it, know about it, and live it, because I think, believe it or not, these folks are repairing the world as well. And I feel privileged to know them and to know someone like you who can help me make the bridge between my Jewish heritage and the work that I'm doing. I'm wondering, should we open it up for questions? What do you think, Rivkah?
I just wanted to push back at you, Elaine. Forgive me. It's chutzpahdik. But when you call them rapists, murderers, etc., something inside of me recoiled. yes, they did those actions. But, and who am I talking to? I mean, you are the queen of seeing the goodness in them. But I guess I'm thinking about two events. One is Rabbi Shalom Lipsker, who has headed Aleph Institute since the 80s, once got permission for a group of men to leave prison for a short amount of time and go to a Farbrengen with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said to him, make sure not to seat them all together. I don't want anybody else at the Farbrengen that gets wind of this to be looking at them. I don't want them to feel self-conscious about who they are. I want them to come to this Farbrengen and be able to sit like everyone else with dignity. And when I heard him recounting that story, I literally started to cry, because he probably would have done the logical thing, had them all sit together, it was one group, etc. But the Rebbe didn't want them to be showcased as such. And one Sunday when people were, another vignette, one Sunday when people were kind of passing by the Rebbe, receiving on the iconic dollar line, receiving $1 to give to somebody else to better their life and a blessing, one man identified himself as somebody who had just left prison, and he said, so the Rebbe said to him, you have to leave that behind you. You have to go forward. In other words, Rebbe was saying, I don't want you to define yourself by that experience for the rest of your life. And he looked at the Rebbe, he said, I don't think I can do that. This is how I see myself. And it must have been in close proximity to Passover. And the Rebbe said, Passover is about redemption. It's about leaving Egypt. I need you to leave Egypt. And he said, I can't. And the Rebbe said, well, if you try, I hope you will be able to. So yes, these are people who've done certain actions, certainly, but due to you and people like you can find their way out and hopefully can find their way past and beyond. And of course, they'll be better people for the process. So just wanted to
Thank you. I let Michael have the stage.
Well, thank you to both of you. That was really powerful and amazing, and both so well spoken, and it's just moving, I think, for anyone who just listened to that. So yeah, we want to open it up for conversation. This is for bringing questions. At the bottom of the screen, there should be a Q&A area, so you can put a question in there, or you can use the little raise your hand button, or you can physically raise your hand and ask your question in person. And I'll try to see everybody, because I have a couple screens worth of people here. I have a question too, but I'm gonna let everyone who's been patiently listening to this amazing dialogue, anyone who wants to jump in, ask a question, add something. This is how we roll around here. We hang out, we talk.
I think I see one there, Michael.
Why can't I see anything? Who's got a question?
Oh, no, it just says great talk. And
oh, yeah.
Comment in the chat, Michael.
I'm in the Q&A.
Oh, Susan Levine has her hand up.
Okay. Nice, do you want to let Susan in?
I was muted.
You're
okay.
unmuted.
Thank you, both of you, for a fascinating talk and real inspiration. But Elaine, I want to ask you, does it ever not work? And what do you do when it doesn't, or if it doesn't?
Okay, I've got two that I could say right away. There was a young man who murdered a young woman in a methamphetamine drug deal gone bad. The mother, believe this or not, wanted to know what her daughter said on her deathbed as she was dying, and why she was killed, and what happened to the gun. The man intended to meet with her. We prepped for months and months and months. He was at Folsom Prison, not far from here. And then at the end, he called us and said, we're not going to do this. My father is a correction officer, and he tells me it's going to come back to bite me. And although it doesn't go in records and wouldn't have, but so we had to accept it. But he wrote a letter of apology that should have been published. It was just beautifully and deeply written. So the woman, instead of meeting, now has the letter. So that was positive. I've worked with 2 people who committed sexual harm who didn't want to meet with the victims of their crime. But one of them decided that he was a musician, Christian musician, actually, in churches and prison. He wrote a country and Western song of apology. And I brought it to her in a tape and played it for her. So, and then I've had others always around sexual harm where they say no. It's as if they're not quite ready to accept the responsibility. But I've done probably about 25 of these, and I've worked with several hundred men in prison now too, not just doing this. To a person, when asked to do this, they accept it gratefully because it's an opportunity they never had and have wanted. Every prisoner that I talk to wants to apologize from the heart for what they've done. And I have to say, I work with men who've been in for a long time, right? So they've done their work. You ask me about a gangbanger who's been in for a couple of months, years, they're not ready, but these other folks are.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you.
Yeah,
Elaine,
great.
2 things. One is you cited 2 stories where you said it didn't work, but it sounds like it worked very beautifully, just not in the conventional way.
Exactly.
You know, so that's big. The other thing, you keep talking about men. Have you worked with any women?
No, and I'll tell you why.
Yes, tell us.
The reason that I don't work with women is because women commit crimes in conjunction with the men with whom they are partnered, or because they have been harmed in some way by like brought into prostitution and killed their pimp, or done a political crime in a group. The most heinous crimes, although I have to say I've recently been revising a textbook that I'm writing, and the data is increasing that women are in fact committing more violent crimes, but still nowhere in comparison to what men have done. And when I started this work, I really wanted to work with the darkest of the dark situations and the most violent of situations. But I did edit a book once called Women, Prison, and Therapy. And in it, a number of my colleagues write about the redemptive qualities of working in prison. Most of them, I think it's 96% of all women in prison are mothers. And so you work with them around the motherhood. Most of them want to go back to their kids. Their kids are often taken from them because of the crimes they've committed. So it behooves us to work with them. I've just never been invited into a woman's prison. And I probably would love to start now that I've done this for so many years. Next question. Do you see any?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a question from Diana Scott.
Yeah, before that, I have one other in the Q&A. Sorry, there's a lot of questions. Amy in the Q&A asks, it's related to what you're talking about. Do prisoners who go through this process have a lower rate of recidivism?
Oh, completely. Yes. They don't redo their crimes. And many of them, you have to understand that many of these people do these crimes when they're young men. And we all know about developmentally, they're not quite, have not really reached adulthood. They do it as members of gangs, or they do it in crimes of passion, a momentary thing. And then they age out, their brains change, and they don't come. I just met a guy last week. It was so fabulous for me. He'd been in for 38 years for a crime of killing his wife, who had been having an affair, and then trying to kill the man she had the affair with. And I knew him inside and wrote letters on his behalf. And then I took him to lunch in Berkeley. And, I took him he had Indian food for the first time. And we went to a grocery store and touched vegetables he had never seen. And it was just this sense of moving forward and moving out of the identity of prisoner, as Rivkah spoke to it, and really beginning to change their lives completely. So it's been a moving experience. Other questions?
Yeah, there are other questions, plenty of them. I'm still saving room for my question, but maybe I'll ask my question first, since I'm the moderator. I'm invoking moderator privilege. And then Diana Scott will come to your question, and Linda as well. My question is a little bit more for Rivkah, I think, which is that from reading some of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's texts and Jewish mystical thoughts, et cetera, my humble knowledge of that, there's an interesting idea from, if I'm getting it right, and I wanted to ask you about it, which is that not only does a prisoner, what's the word, robbed of something when they go to prison, but that actually the rest of us, that society itself is robbed of the possible contribution and completion of that person's journey that could have benefited society, but that had they not been incarcerated, which is an odd flip, that we're missing something by their incarceration.
Rivkah,
Michael, thank
you.
Sorry, Elaine, did you want to say something?
No, I'm leaving that one to you.
Oh,
yeah, that one's for Rivkah.
I thank you for that question, because when Elaine and I were talking about this presentation, there was something that kept coming to my mind, but ultimately we decided it was maybe too far afield. And that was that there is a biblical imperative to return something to its owner. And on the face of it, it sounds like a really wonderful, moral, kind, decent thing to do. You find somebody's scarf, for instance, you find somebody's belongings, you should return it to them. But the Torah doesn't just talk about it as something nice to do or good to do, but it's actually a biblical commandment. And I'm not going to bore everybody now, but it could get very, very, let's just say, onerous or taxing on the person who finds an errant chicken that belongs to somebody else. They can't find the owner, then they have to take care of the chicken and the eggs and the chicklings, and then the eggs that they will lay, and so on and so forth. And the question from the perspective of Jewish mysticism is, what's going on here, really? I mean, and yes, there is a statute of limitations and there are all kinds of details, but in general, one has to exercise a great amount of effort to find the owner. And it's exactly what you spoke about, that we are all inextricably bound in one large project. And every one of us has an aspect of this world that is ours to refine, to uplift, to transform. Every one of us has sparks of divinity that have been allotted to our soul to extricate from physical matters that we interact with. So if I find your scarf and I don't put in the effort to find its original owner and I wear it, I know this may sound a little bit out there for people not familiar with this idea of nitzotzot kedusha, the holy sparks that are found in every aspect of this universe, and the idea that we are here to uplift and transform and use things in a holy way to unleash these sparks and fill this world with godly light. But if you put yourself in that mind space, and if I'm wearing your scarf and you haven't gifted it to me and I haven't bought it, then two things are happening. There's nothing I can do to transform that scarf, to unleash the divine sparks in the scarf. And you cannot do the work you were meant to do with that scarf. And so there are cosmic reverberations. Now, if this is true about restoring a physical anything, any physical matter to its original owner, how much more this applies to restoring the human being's dignity, their ability to find their purpose, to act on their purpose, because only then can they do their work that the entire universe is depending on. I mean, God doesn't create junk. A person's birth means the world needs them in a way that only they specifically can contribute to the cosmic project. So it's the most exalted form of the Hebrew. The Hebrew term is hashavat aveda, finding a lost object and returning it to its original owner. And that's what this is really all about, if you look at it, at the heart and soul of it.
I just have to say, do you see why I love studying with Rivkah?
Yeah.
She's a woman of depth and substance. She
I
takes
know.
I would not otherwise go.
All
I
right,
know.
Elaine.
That was
Love each other.
that was a heck of an answer to that question, because I've thinking about that coming into this, but boy, was that a great expansive answer. Let me see. We have time for maybe a couple more questions. Now, this one is Elaine, I'm going to combine this into two things for you. One, I think you might be able to speak to. One might be a little tricky. So Linda is asking, could you see some benefit to working in juvenile facilities? And Diana is asking, and this is a much larger conversation and we only have a few minutes, but would this, the work you do be applicable? I should read the question directly. Any thoughts on the application of this process to negotiating peace in war zones? What
Yes.
steps could that, what steps in that process might look like? How might it apply?
I'll start with the easy one, and then maybe too. Yeah, this gets done, Linda, in juvenile settings, often in high schools and also JV facilities when the juvenile justice facilities, when they existed. Now they're dismantling them in California. So what we try to do is to keep the kids out of the criminal injustice system and move them into some kind of dialogue around the harm that they have caused both to themselves, their families, and the community. And so they will bring them into circles where they would talk with the kids who they might have harmed, the teachers and representing the community that they've harmed, and then the families and the reverberations that have happened in the families as a result. And I do believe this process could be used in horrific situations like are going on right now. Of course, I'm not a diplomat and I don't do foreign relations, but I wish that there were skilled negotiators doing restorative justice to bring about these kinds of dialogues. Because to me, eventually, that's ultimately what has to be done. Do I have the means? Absolutely not. But I know that there are people out there working at that macro level that could implement these ideas. I see this idea as it's germinating and it's growing and it's getting out there and it's slow. That's what's radical about restorative justice. It's a whole new paradigm shift rather than looking at punitive and battling, but really seeing the humanity in each person. So I do believe it can be done globally.
Excellent. I don't see any more questions in the chat right now, and it's just about 1 o'clock. So why don't we go out on top? That was just amazing. There'll be all of you here today will get an email with a recording of this for Bringin. Feel free to distribute it. I think I'm speaking for everyone in saying it was quite amazing. So round of Zoom applause. And you'll all be hearing, we'll have our next for Bringin in April, which will be This is hard to live up to, but we hope you'll join us for that. I will be sending out an announcement. Thank you, Sally, for laughing. We'll be sending out an announcement for when the April Farbringen will be. And I want to thank both of our guests for being with us. And Denise, who's in the background. Have I said everything?
Yes, I think so. But the recording is on the same link that people joined with. So in about half an hour, it'll be available.
Okay, fantastic. And this will run again on our social media for the IJSS if you want to follow us on Facebook. We have a lot of interesting things that go on there as well. Boy, that was just fantastic. And I guess without further ado, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see everybody in April.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Elaine, my teure Freund. And early happy Purim to everyone.
Thanks, Rivkah.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Denise. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone for coming today.
We'll sign off the way we usually do, Elaine and I. Seid gesund und stark. Be well.
Perfect.